Hello and welcome back to goldstocktrades.com. Today we have a new and special guest with us, Curtis Moore. Curtis is Vice President of Marketing and Corporate Development at Energy Fuels. Energy Fuels can be traded as UUUU on the NYSE market and as EFR on the TSX. Thanks, Curtis, for being here with us today.
Hey, thank you, Jeb. It's always great to talk to you.
We're talking about a topic, nuclear energy in the uranium sector, which is currently out of favor if you look at the market, amongst investors. But fundamentally, if you study the factors out there, we have a world of over 1 billion people with no electricity, and the world is transferring away from fossil fuels to clean energy. So there is a push for nuclear energy and a possible revival coming over the next few years. Do you still see a revival in the nuclear sector, Curtis?
Yeah, definitely. Just so as I'm sure you're aware, uranium prices are at some multi-year lows right now. But what's interesting is that we do see nuclear reactors being built all over the world right now, particularly in Asia. There was a lot of promise about a nuclear renaissance back in the 2006, 7, 8 time period. At that time, the price of uranium hit almost $140 per pound. Since that time, we had the Fukushima disaster that happened in Japan, and I would say that the nuclear renaissance took a little bit of a pause. And was maybe kind of put on hold in places like the United States and Europe. However, in Asia, they've gone through their pause and they are aggressively building new nuclear reactors. China is likely to double their current nuclear capacity between now and 2020. Russia has 8 units under construction, and they just announced yesterday that they're going to plan to build another 11 or 12 units by 2030. India has a massive program. South Korea has a big program. Even countries in the Middle East are looking at nuclear power. The Emirates are building some reactors. We firmly believe that the uranium markets are going to turn here at some point as soon as we work through a few of these excess inventories we're facing right now.
Curtis, I came to learn more about Energy Fuels after the acquisition of Uranium, which we followed for many years. Energy Fuels has also made some additional acquisitions in 2016, I think in June. Could you talk to us about how Energy Fuels is sort of being known as a consolidator in the uranium sector?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Well, Energy Fuels has basically grown up through consolidations. Back in that 2004, 5, 6 time period into 2007, if you followed the space at all, you knew that there were a whole bunch of little uranium mining companies that popped up during that time. And quite frankly, we were one of them. I mean, I think that we had better quality assets at that time, but it almost seemed like anybody that had a cow pasture with some uranium in it started a company and made a bunch of money. Well, we've gone through, that's been about 10 years ago now. And the space has definitely been culled down, and there's not a whole lot of us left. But I would say that Energy Fuels was one of the ones that really rose to the top. We have grown through a lot of acquisitions. You mentioned our acquisition of Uranium last year. That was a very, very good acquisition for us since it gave us ISR production. That's in situ recovery, which tends to have some lower costs associated with it. And then, as you said, in June here, we just acquired another company called Mestania Uranium. And this is another in situ producer. They're located in South Texas. Mestania was a privately held company, so a lot of your investors probably are not particularly familiar with it. But Mestania is a very good established producer in the United States. They produced about 5 million pounds of uranium between 2005 and 2013. The guy who actually built their project, which is called the Alta Mesa project, is Paul Goranson, who came over to us on our acquisition of Uranium. So he's the one that's running all of our ISR operations in the company. And again, the best thing about Mestania and the acquisition of Alta Mesa is that it again lowered our cost profile, which is very important in today's weak uranium price environment.
Curtis, we're seeing right now in the gold sector. I remember 8 months ago, 9 months ago, there was very little interest in the gold sector, and now there seems to be a complete turnaround, and these stocks that were trading at are trading at quadruple or quintuple their value. So this is how fast the turnaround's been in gold. Could there be something in store for uranium down the road, maybe a couple of years, or there's going to be a turnaround in this sort of sector, like we've seen in the gold market?
Well, I don't want to speculate too much on what can happen. I can just point to what's happened in history, though. I would say that that these swings that you see in the gold space are probably much more exaggerated even in the uranium space. If you look back at the, just a couple of examples. I mean, one example that I've discussed here internally, just because we've had a couple of people that came over from this company, was International Uranium, which is IUC. And actually, IUC held a lot of the assets that we now hold, our U.S. production assets. And again, IUC later merged with Denison, and so that's kind of a little bit of history there. But IUC back in 2000, 2001, 2003, I mean, that was right in the middle of about the worst uranium market you could ever see. IUC, as I recall, they were trading for around 9 or 10 cents a share at that time. They were shutting down operations. Things were looking pretty bleak for them. But then all of a sudden, things started turning around in 2004, 5, 6. And I think that the IUC at one point hit something like $7 or $8 a share. Again, that's maybe a little bit of an unusual circumstance, but those are the kinds of returns that have been observed in the past among uranium companies. It's just, the returns are potentially big. You just have to be patient. You look back at the history of uranium prices. It is a story about booms and busts, and that 2007 period was a big boom. Right now, I would argue that we're in the midst of a bust. But I don't think it's going to last. I mean, I'm targeting personally 2018, 2019 as to when we could see uranium prices really start to get to levels that will be very good for us. Let's say in the $50s to $60 per pound range. Keep in mind, price of uranium was $72 a pound right before Fukushima. So, $50, $55 per pound is not out of the question whatsoever. That 18-19 time period, there's a few things happening out there that I think are going to start turning the market around. There's some fairly significant inventories being sold by the U.S. government that run out at that time. I think Japan will be back online to a large extent at that time. China is, of course, building a lot of reactors. There's a couple of large mines that are expected to be depleted by that time. And I think that the market will probably start to correct even in advance of that. So I'd like to think that right now we're at the bottom of the uranium market. Now, of course, I've said that before, and I've been wrong. But I don't know. I just feel like this market is setting up for a rebound here in the next couple of years.
What brought a lot of I was really interested in was that the U.S. just built their first nuclear reactor in more than 40 years, and it's building 4 more plants. So could you talk to us about what's going on in the U.S.
Sure.
And how Energy Fuels is kind of uniquely positioned in the U.S., especially the Southwest U.S.?
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, as you said, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, they're just now starting up this year. They did earlier this year, the first new nuclear reactor in over 20 years. That's very exciting in the United States. I mean, a lot of people think that nuclear energy in the U.S. is kind of on the outs, but that's just not true at all. This one is coming online. It's a 1,200 megawatt unit, I believe is the number. There's 2 units that are being built in South Carolina. There's 2 units being built in Georgia. A lot of the media likes to fixate on some of the units that were shutting down, and there are some shutdowns happening prematurely in the U.S., but those are typically smaller units. They don't produce as much electricity, and therefore they don't consume as much uranium. I do think that nuclear in the U.S. is going to maintain its current levels. I don't think it's going to go down much or up too much. And then also New York. There was some good news that came out of there where they just passed some new laws that help support nuclear power in New York. There was a couple of units that were at risk of being shut down, and this new legislation is going to save those units. And I'm hoping that other states begin to recognize the clean air benefits of nuclear energy. And so, the U.S. right now, at least temporarily, is the world's largest producer of nuclear energy, and we have been for a long time. I think China is probably going to overtake us sometime in the 2020s, but right now the U.S. is the world's largest nuclear market. And I think Energy Fuels, since we're focused on the United States and all of our production is in the United States, I think that's a very strategic position for us. We're not going to be able to produce enough uranium to fuel the U.S. nuclear fleet, but we do plan to be the largest producer of uranium in the United States. And I think that there's some real benefits to being in that position.
Yeah, it is a unique position, Curtis, and even more so is because we've been relying on imported Russian nuclear fuel for I think like 20 years, and we import most of our uranium from Kazakhstan, and there's a lot of concern, that the security of supply in the United States, and maybe labeling uranium as a sort of a strategic metal for clean energy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and as you said, the U.S. is heavily dependent on foreign sources of uranium. The numbers came out not too long ago for 2015, and the U.S. only produced 3.6 million pounds of uranium last year. These are very, very low levels. Yet U.S. nuclear reactors consume about 50 million pounds per year. So you can see the level of reliance that we have on foreign sources. And I believe the number also came out that it was almost 40% of all the uranium used in U.S. nuclear reactors came from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. Again, these are countries that are basically within Russia's sphere of influence. So when you look at the fact that nuclear produces, we produce about 20% of our electricity in the United States from nuclear power, and we get about 40% of that uranium from, as I said, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. That means like 8% of our electricity in the U.S. is somewhat dependent on Russia. That's a little bit of a tenuous position, especially with some of the things that is going on in Russia and with with Putin and all that. So I do think that U.S. production should be viewed much more favorably by utilities, and if things continue as they're going right now, I think that we will be. There used to actually be a premium paid for U.S. Produced material back in, I think, in the 70s or the 80s. That's not happening right now, but as these geopolitical risks begin to manifest, that premium may even come back.
Yeah, it may come back, Curtis. And your Energy Fuels owns 2 uranium production facilities in the U.S. It's listed on the three now. Excuse me. One of the few new NYSE listed companies, uranium companies. Talk to us about, we have last minute, your strong balance sheet, working capital compared to some of your peers.
Well, we do have, I think, a stronger balance sheet than some of our peers. Now, I'll tell you, the whole uranium space is struggling right now. You even see Cameco came out with their last quarterly results, and you can see some of the stress that they're under. So I'm not going to say we have a strong balance sheet, though I think, definitely not compared to Cameco. But I think within the uranium space, I think we are, in a better position than many out there. As you said, we have 3 uranium production facilities. Nobody else can claim that. We have 2 ISR facilities, which are low cost. We have 1 conventional facility, the White Mesa Mill, which is very scalable, meaning that we could really ramp up production as prices start to go up. So again, we're just trying to, get through this low time and make sure that we stay strong, so that we're able to really capture those higher prices when they come. So I do think that we're one of the best positioned companies in the world right now to capture those higher prices and increase production accordingly.
Curtis Moore, Vice President of Marketing, Corporate Development at Energy Fuels, which can be traded as UUUU on the New York Stock Exchange and as EFR on the TSX. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Yep, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.